Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Natalia Mattioli. I am the Programs Coordinator for the UN Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Multi-Partner Trust Fund. And I'm here today on behalf of Dr. Ola Abualghaib, which wasn't able to join us for a personal emergency. So I'm here joined by set of distinguished panelists, which I will introduce immediately and then give them the floor. So here with us today is Dr. Heike Kuhn, which is the Head of Division for Education of Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development from Germany. Ms. Gabriela Ramos, which is the Assistant Director General for the Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO. Tala Al-Ramahi is the Chief Strategy Officer for Reaching the Last Mile. Stefan Trommel is the Senior Disability Specialist at the International Labour Organization. Mahmoud Kabir, which was supposed to be here with us, unfortunately couldn't join. And last but not least, Kati Antalainen, sorry if I mispronounced, Senior Specialist at the International Relations Unit at the Ministry of Education and Culture, Finland. So we will start immediately as we know we have some delay in the process. I'll give the floor to Dr. Heike Kuhn for some opening remarks. Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me? Does it work? Okay. But it's a small room, we will manage. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today. As has been introduced, I'm the head of division in the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. And I'm here just with a little keynote for setting the scene. So what are we talking about today here at COP28? Doesn't work. Okay, like this. We have worldwide, you know this, 8 billion people, 1 billion of this 8 billion world population, 1 billion is children, and 240 million children worldwide live with disabilities. So it's a quarter of them, and it's such a huge number, and we have promised them to not leave them behind, and this is what we won't do. So more of half of them do not go to school. And this is frightening. More girls are affected than boys. And things are getting worse, and this is why we are all here, due to the climate crisis. I personally don't speak of climate change. I would like to prefer to speak about the climate crisis. So what do we need to do? We have to already in normal times, without climate change or climate crisis, we need to be resilient, to have really resilient infrastructure, resilient systems. And we really have to look for the special needs of everyone, special needs of those with special needs. On the resilience, especially for the persons, for the disabled children, we need to be more prudent than with others, so we have to adopt the curricula on climate change for everyone, not only for those who are disabled, but also the others. Everybody has to know. So I want, just in the beginning, I want to give you a personal experience from my country, Germany, a so-called rich country, where I'm living in the former city, near the city of Bonn. You may remember that 2 years ago we had a huge flood in a little place. This took place 10 kilometers from myself, and we had 130 dead people, a lot of them children. And what was really frightening, this was frightening, it is a small river, wonderful vineyards, it is a nice place, but what happened was a bad weather things. This little river was huge. And this is what happens in so many so-called developing countries. In the very end, there was a big flood wave, and this brought away everything. And this happened at night. And in the very, very end of this, just next to the Rhine River, there was a place, a dormitory, a place where where a disabled person lived. And they managed to, of these 22 persons, they managed to rescue the half of them, but not the other half. So people with disabilities, young persons, they were washed away, flooded away, because the infrastructure was not there. And this is a trauma in our country. So I really, and this is a so-called developed country, so I'm personally very much still live on this. So, but now coming back, what do we do as the German government? I want to tell you that we are really committed to children, to persons with disability, and we do this. How do we do this? We do this bilaterally, and we do this on a multilateral way. So bilaterally, there's a strong engagement, and we reach out to everybody, and especially also I want to say it's so important to reach out also to teachers, because children with disabilities, persons with disabilities, they have also, with their special need, they need good teachers. So multilaterally, I'm sitting on the boards of ECW and GPE, and for instance, we did the new strategic plan for ECW, which is Education Cannot Wait. There is on the strategic plan, we made on it that 10% of all financial flows have to go to children with disabilities. And on GPE, the big fund hosted by the World Bank, Global Partnership for Education in Washington, we did the same. So we're really looking to trying to get this in everywhere where we spend the money of German taxpayers, if you could say so. And I'm coming just from Tanzania. We visited at the GPE board, and we visited a school, and it was impressive how also the Tanzanian government, we visited how the blind young persons learned over there, and there were already the possibilities. And in summer, in my country, you may remember, we had the Special Olympics in Berlin, also via sport we looked there. And now coming to the end of my little keynote, I also want to invite you, or already tell you what we are doing. My colleague already said that. Just before we also, or I don't know if she mentioned it, we just had a bilateral project. One is this example is the promotion of quality and inclusive education in Jordan. And with Jordan, we are in a really good cooperation, because I'm very proud, and I would like to announce it here and say that Germany will be hosting the Global Disability Summit in April 25 in Berlin. And this is a unique mechanism that works to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. And we are trying really to fulfill all our commitment to the UN Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. You know, this is CRPD, to really reach out to everybody. This is what I wanted to say here today. Especially with the Kingdom, and we are so grateful to the Kingdom of Jordan and the International Disability Alliance, because we want to bridge the gap between the inclusion of persons with disability, development, cooperation, and education. And we will ask everyone, you can be sure of this, in between government, civil society, private sector, academia, the youth, to really commit and advancing disability inclusion in the local and in the global, regional, and national level. So thank you so much, and I learned so much from persons with disabilities having worked on this topic, and I think this overarching principle, we also have it now with the youth, this nothing about us without it should really apply to everyone. And thank you so much for your patience with me and for your kind attention. Thank you. And I have to say, I have to leave now. It's not that I'm not polite, but I'm on two panels at the same time. Now I go to the girls. But I'm with you, and the others will tell me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kuhn. And just wanted to also thank Germany for contributing to the Multi-Partner Trust Fund. And we look forward to collaborate also within the Global Disability Summit. Thank you very much. And our colleague, Dr. Kuhn, has set the scene for the discussion today and the relation between climate change climate action and education, and how we can apply the disability lens while focusing on the topic. I'll now give the floor to Ms. Gabriela Ramos from UNESCO, which will deliver a keynote. I don't know if you want to also go.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you to Ola, our best to her, the champion of these issues. I am Gabriela Ramos. I'm the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences. So I can tell you that my colleague Stefania Giannini, who leads the educational part, is pretty much committed to this agenda. It's really important that wherever policies we develop, we really include those that are with special needs. And just putting it up front as a priority, just this panel helps us to think about what are the specific issues that are that come to mind whenever we talk about disabilities. And we are really pleased to partner with the UNPRPD because we have been working to develop this agenda, to work with countries to think about how do we address the special needs of people with disability in different contexts. We did it with COVID. I think that we launched a very powerful program to see how much the decisions taken to address the pandemic did not consider special needs. And therefore, the reflection that we have today, when we are hearing, are we going to arrive or not to get a meaningful agreement on climate? And then the second stage is that agreement going to consider the needs of people with disability or not? And to do that, we need to have a lot of evidence of what does it mean to be somebody living with disabilities in a context where we are completely threatened by climate change events every day, by disaster risk every day, and whether we are prepared or not. We know, for example, Nature magazine has found that during climate emergencies, individuals with disability face 2 to 4 times higher mortality rates. That's normal. I'm actually, Natalia, also going to leave after my speech because I have a gender panel. But in that gender panel, I got to see that only 40% of women learn how to swim. 40% compared to 70% of men. Imagine what happens when you have a tsunami. What happens with people with disability? I mean, it's just so important that we frame the decisions and that we advance the solutions for the very special needs. And we know also, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that almost 3.3 to 3.6 billion people, almost half of the world, live in areas, zones, regions that are prone to emergencies. Therefore, you just compound the whole thing and it gets a panorama that we really don't like. We also know that 121 countries have disability laws and acts, but these are separated. And then the point is how we combine decision-making on climate, decision-making on education, decision-making on some other areas to incorporate the disability lenses, because even in general, just 121 countries have laws for disability people. I mean, it's just too low. And so this is very important. But then the other part to take decisions is how do we gather the data at the national and local context to understand what are those very specific needs? How do we prioritize? How do we establish effective strategies? And therefore, how do we follow the benchmarks? Some of the benchmarks that we have researched, we know that Colombia has established the National Unit for the Management of Disaster Risks, whose objective is to strengthen the protection of resilience of high-risk groups, including people with disability. Ecuador developed the methodological guide for inclusive disaster risk management, again, including this perspective. Finland, I'm happy that we are having our panelists today. Measures have been set up to access information on climate change, including for people with disability. And the Ombudsperson for Children has considered climate change as her priority, and then looking for more vulnerable groups. Jordan National Adaptation Plan comes with a communication strategy, very important. Also, the Swedish authorities have these communication strategies because many times we launch communication campaigns about disasters, about different shocks that we are confronting, but we don't think about how these also need to be tailored with people that don't see, don't hear, don't speak, and therefore, how do we tailor these communication campaigns? I was last week in Sao Paulo, and congratulations to Brazil, because we launched the 3rd edition of the Global Forum Against Racism and Discrimination of UNESCO. Very impressive set of partners and champions against discrimination. And we were proud also to have the UNPRPD with this specific topic of ending disability discrimination through more inclusive policy frameworks. We're also working with cities. I mean, we're really trying to advance this agenda in a way that is effective. First, how do we make it a priority? Second, how do we frame it and get the information and the laws right? Third, how do we make it happen? And therefore, I'm very glad that you're here to listen to this wonderful panel. I will follow you by the broadcasting, but thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gabriela, also for touching upon a few key elements such as data generation and evidence. Gabriela also mentioned a few of the UNPRPD programs, and it's just for those that are not familiar with the work of the fund. The UNPRPD is a unique funding mechanism within the UN system that brings together UN agencies, including, of course, UNESCO, ILO, and many others, Organization of Persons with Disabilities, and governments. And we invest in country to support them to advance disability inclusion and inclusive SDGs. Thank you very much, Gabriela. Now, one of our guests have gracefully agreed to make a shift in the program, so we'll let the floor now to Mr. Stefan Trommel, which is the Senior Disability Specialist at the International Labour Organization. And Stefan will speak a little bit about how we can ensure that persons with disabilities education are included in NDC and National Adaptation Plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Good afternoon, in fact, yeah. Unfortunately, I will need to follow my previous two speakers also to run to another event on the other side of the green zone. I should have put some running shoes like you have there. Perhaps we can change them. So it's the absolute other extreme. It's like 20 minutes, and I have to be there to 20. So thanks a lot for letting me speak first. The International Labour Organization, as you know, is part of the United Nations, and its employment and social protection are the key issues of our mandate. And within that, I had a small disability team through which we are trying to ensure that when the ILO promotes what we call decent work, it is also decent work for persons with disabilities. And why is the ILO here? Because within all these discussions around climate change and climate action, there's also an employment dimension to that. There's a change in the economy, jobs that will disappear, what we call the brown industry, and jobs that are being created new, what we call green economy. And this process of change from the brown to the green is what is being used, the term is being used, is just transition. No? So basically, our message is this just transition needs to be gender responsive, of course, but also needs to be disability inclusive. No? And that is basically why I'm here these days. Because as you know, the evidence shows that the current situation for persons with disabilities in the labor market is very bad. We have statistics in the ILO which show that in general, throughout all regions, there are 30 to 40 percentage points less included in the labor market. So let's say if persons without disabilities have an employment participation of 70%, people with disabilities will be around 25, 30%. And that's more or less across the board. And of course, we see, we're always trying to find the new employment opportunities that show up to see how much persons with disabilities can benefit from these new opportunities, to try to make sure that the future labor market shows better statistics. And within the group of persons with disabilities, of course, we need to pay particular attention to youth with disabilities, COVID accelerated exponentially the unemployment of youth in general, youth with disabilities in particular. We also see that the green economy is not yet fully gender inclusive and gender responsive. There is an overrepresentation of men in some of the new jobs that are being created. And if we then combine with disability, well, just as a reminder, we need to pay particular attention to youth and women with disabilities in our work. We published just a few weeks ago a publication on what we call disability inclusive green transition, trying to look at some of the markets, the green economy sector, so to say, and to see what are the skills that are needed in those sectors, and what can we do to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to the skills that will then allow them to have access to those jobs. We did a similar publication 2 years earlier during the COVID times on the digital economy. This was the same logic. And the message is pretty much the same. If we don't ensure that persons with disabilities don't have access to the skills, to the digital and green skills, sometimes the digital and green skills together, because, I mean, of course, also in the green economy there are digital jobs. If we don't ensure that people with disabilities have the access to those skills, and that means education, it means vocational training, which is within our mandate of the ILO, it's higher education universities. If we don't ensure that access, then people with disabilities will either have no job or will definitely not have decent jobs, as we call them in the ILO. And that means for us that in particular it is important that mainstream vocational training is fully inclusive to persons with disabilities. And as I said, with a particular attention also to women with disabilities. For instance, in countries where you have workplace-based learning, apprenticeships, this has proven to be a particularly useful way of overcoming the barriers, the mental barriers, I would say, foremost, that are still there, both in the private sector, but also sometimes among persons with disabilities and their families. We need to be deliberate in our initiatives. We cannot just expect that the green economy, because it sounds very nice, the green economy, it will not necessarily be better than the old economy unless we take deliberate action to make sure that persons with disabilities get their fair share. And that is a bit the message that I want to bring to you. And that is in connection with what Natalia just said. We have the national determined contributions, we have the national action plans, which are the frameworks that our governments establish to promote the change in the action on the climate action. Within those national action plans, national determined contributions, we have, I would say, two overarching or two complementary challenges. First, not always is the employment dimension adequately included in these national action plans and national determined contributions. So what we call just transition is not always explicitly addressed or very much in random. And then at the same time, persons with disabilities are largely invisible in national action plans and national determined contributions. They are somehow a rather forgotten group. So this mantra of leaving no one behind, if you make an analysis, and PRPD has also supported analysis of that type, if you look for references to persons with disabilities in national determined contribution, national action plans, very often you don't find any reference, or perhaps just a reference under among other vulnerable groups, so to say. So that is not good enough. We need to do much better if really we want that future labor market, that green economy, to be more inclusive of persons with disabilities. And that is what we are currently doing in collaboration with other UN agencies, the United Nations Development Programme, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and also in collaboration with the International Disability Alliance. Our German colleague referred to them as the global umbrella organization representing persons with disabilities. The UN Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is currently financing a program that we are implementing with these partners. And the main focus of that program is to build the capacity of disability organizations and of UN entities and governments to fully and explicitly include persons with disabilities in national determined contributions and national action plans on all issues related to climate action, but also in particular on issues related to just transition. I think I'll leave it there, Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we will have maybe, Stefan is leaving, but the gentleman has a question. Maybe we can, yeah, although we are really in a rush, so just please keep it brief. Yeah, a little.
Do you have any analysis of NDCs that what countries are reporting as far as disability is concerned, so that we can have the evidence?
Yes, I mean, I don't have it here with me, but I know that I think already twice such an analysis has been made by the International Disability Alliance in collaboration with McGill University. They've already looked at 2 rounds of national determined contributions and national action plans from a disability point of view. No? And the figures, I think, have slightly improved in the second that is made, but it's still, the vast majority do not include it, or also in very minor references. But I can share that if you leave your contact details with colleagues, we can send you that information. Thank you for the question. It was a rather easy question. Thank you for that also.
Yes, and in terms of what can we do, actually, the program that Stefan has mentioned that is funded through the UNPRPD fund will look into developing tools to ensure that disability is included. And these tools are developed jointly with the UN system, but mostly with organization of persons with disabilities, so how they can also influence at national level these processes. But I'll let Stefan go. I know he's in a rush. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
We'll give you the
Stefan.
space.
Good to meet you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Didn't hear you. So our next speaker is Ms. Tala Al-Ramahi, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for Reaching the Last Mile. And I would kindly ask Tala to reflect on building partnerships across the sectors while looking at climate action and education.
Sure, thank you, Natalia, and thank you to the rewirEd Summit for having us and hosting this discussion. For those of you who don't know, Reaching the Last Mile is a portfolio of global health programs funded by the philanthropy of His Highness the President of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. The reason why Reaching the Last Mile as a portfolio is called what it is because often we are tackling diseases that are in last mile communities. Often these communities are very hard to reach. These communities live in impoverished conditions and are often neglected communities. In fact, one group of diseases that we tackle through the portfolio is called neglected tropical diseases. And when people talk about these diseases, often they talk about these diseases not as neglected diseases, but that these are neglected people. And I think a lot of the learnings that we've had through Reaching the Last Mile reflect and have a lot of lessons that we can take forward when we're addressing the issue of inclusion in people with disabilities. More specifically, I think as we reflect on the climate crisis as well, knowing that those that are impacted by the climate crisis are often the people that contribute the least to it and often suffer the most from it. This is the case for the communities that we serve through Reaching the Last Mile, but it is also the case for people with disabilities. A few of the learnings that we've reflected on through our work on Reaching the Last Mile that I believe are applicable to the education sector and creating climate inclusive and disability inclusive systems are a few that I'll mention. As we work on Reaching the Last Mile, often we've thought about, for example, diseases in silos. So we're tackling malaria elimination, for example. We think about that in a silo versus tackling polio eradication. But as we move forward, and I think a lot of people have realized this when they're working on various programs, whether it's in the education or health sector, is that a lot of these issues are intertwined. And so we have to look at whole systems approaches if we want to be sustainable in the work that we do. Ultimately, we cannot talk about addressing a specific disease or a specific issue more broadly if we're not addressing the system that is influencing it more broadly. And so I think that's one learning from the work that we do. Another learning that we've extracted from this work more specifically is on the importance of partnership. Through Reaching the Last Mile, while we are a philanthropy, we ensure that we are bringing in other types of partners that would ensure the success of this work. So of course we need the catalytic funders or catalytic donors from the philanthropy sector, but we also need country governments to take ownership of their agendas. There is no way that there is enough financing to sustain funding from philanthropy or foreign aid without real ownership from the countries themselves, and for them to have stake in the game by providing the financing needed for their local systems. So that's one other learning from our portfolio that we can take forward when it comes to building climate resilient and inclusive systems, whether it's in education or health. The other thing I think is really important, and this is actually more specific to work that our office has done on disability and inclusion. A few years ago, the Abu Dhabi hosted the Special Olympic World Games. This was, I'm privileged to say, a bid that our office had led. And the event was under the patronage of His Highness the President of the UAE. The reason why this event was very important, it allowed us to have a global platform and a catalyzing moment to trigger accelerated action towards disability and inclusion. That was incredibly important for us. We leveraged that event particularly to start addressing urgent issues around disability and inclusion that are often left behind, frankly, in policies or deprioritized. But the World Games really allowed us to push that agenda forward. And we couldn't have done this without having His Highness as a champion for this agenda. And I think especially for disability and inclusion, of course, we have a lot of disability champions from within the space. And of course, their voices need to be centered in this discussion. But also, I think the value of having global leaders champion the issue of disability and inclusion is incredibly important as well. One other thing, and this was referenced earlier, is the importance of data, and especially data for policy making. And as we think about how the climate crisis is affecting different demographic groups, through our work on the nexus of climate and health more particularly, we realize that the climate crisis is a health crisis. However, we still do not have all the data for us to create direct links between how climate change is affecting specific disease elimination programs, or more broadly, specific programs within global health. Similarly, so for climate change and disability and inclusive systems, I think there is still a lot of data that is required to better understand the size of the problem, but also data to allow us to develop more inclusive policies that are data-driven. And then I guess one final thing to reflect on as well, something that Professor Jeffrey Sachs mentioned in his keynote, that while it's important to rewire education for whether it's climate action or otherwise, it's also important to rewire financing. And you cannot implement policies and programs that are inclusive, that are climate resilient, without the financing required to do so. And so, as much as we would love to come up with great ideas on how to create more climate resilient health systems or more climate resilient education systems that leave no one behind, if we don't have the financing and the funding to do so, unfortunately, these programs and these systems will fail. So rewiring financing, ensuring that we gain access to climate financing in adaptation, and mitigation is incredibly important, in making sure that financing takes the lens of everyone that is often left behind, including people with disabilities. So I'll stop at there, but thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much, Tala, for your insightful points. I really think that what you mentioned on countries' ownership is a key factor. We see it in our programs, and to ensure that programs are sustainable, we need really to address this different systems and having a catalytic approach to transformative change. So thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear from your experience. Speaking about the partnerships and bringing in different stakeholders, I would like now to introduce our next speaker. I'm very happy to see that you were able to join us. Mr. Mahbub Kabir, who is the Advocacy and Inclusion Advisory Manager from CBM Ireland. And Mahbub will reflect on the experience of organizations of persons with disabilities influencing national climate and education policies and processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm very happy to be able to make it. I ended up being at the very wrong end, and it took me like,
often,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, so, yeah. And especially I had a stroke recently, and my lower part is numb, and mobility, I'm not complaining though,
Okay.
but well, it has been a kind of general complaint kind of thing by many of my colleagues who have greater mobility issue anyway. So anyway, I mean, this COP venue is inclusive, better than many other previous COP venues as well. So it's not a complaint. Thank you for having me. As you have heard, that I work for an organization called Christian Blind Mission. I'm based in Ireland, but it's not really about Christian or blind or mission. It's about disability inclusion. That's what we do, and we do it in partnership with OPDs. So what is OPD? It might sound like very new or very kind of innovative or something very unknown to you. So this is also called DPOs, by the way. So OPDs has been adopted by the UN language, but DPO, which is Disabled People's Organization, is more popular with the people with disabilities themselves. So that's how probably the movement of people with disabilities have learned in hard way, because their own language was not adopted by official language. So anyway, I'll not get into that kind of politics of language that much, but like to give you a kind of brief overview of like the people we are talking about. We're talking about 16% of global population. You have heard this from other speakers, which means what? It's more than 1 billion population. But if you look around, how many of them are here within the entire climate space? If you go back to where we are originally from, how often do we see in our workplaces, in our schools, educational spaces? So there must be something wrong with the system that we call education system, with a policy that we call education policy, and many other policies that we actually are very fond of. Like sometimes we take them as totem, that, well, they're very good policy, very strong, so on and so forth. So we call it exclusion. Very soft, apolitical wording, though. I mean, in other disciplines, it's called discrimination. Kicking people out of the space that we call education, very novel, very safe, and very kind of clean place, which it is not. Historically, people with disabilities have been excluded from the education policy and system and the space itself. Why was that? So I was trying to listen to the previous speakers. I mean, unfortunately, they're gone. I wanted to intervene, but, well, I didn't want to be that mean, being a fellow speaker. But, like, the first word, like, the concept that I heard is called special needs. What is special needs, by the way? Why some people's need would be special and mine would be not special? And like being part of disability movement and being part of an organization promotes rights-based approach to disability, we do not accept those kind of phrases that, well, some people's right or needs should be special. There's no special needs. But we often use the term, even in official language. Well, some people have special needs. There's no special needs. If you respect human rights, Universal Human Rights Declaration, and many other treaties, UN treaties, and like basic fundamentals of human rights, there's nothing called special rights, because it's founded on the principles of equality. And if we believe in equality, we do not discriminate, we do not exclude some people, then how come this language still dominate in our very mainstream conversation? So that's one of the things that you often highlight. Another thing that I have heard, like I was listening to many other conversations that I have recently joined in, vulnerable. And I have heard this phrase here as well, being used and being praised and and people are okay with that. What is vulnerability? How we call some people vulnerable, and to us, vulnerable is an outcome of many other different things. People become vulnerable when they face exclusion, they face discrimination, and as a result of that, historically, some population category are regarded as vulnerable population category. And people with disabilities are often talked about and referred to as vulnerable. third thing is, that's another thing I've heard, people living with disability. I mean, I'm not sure where do people get this kind of phrases from. This came from medical dictionary. Living with, meaning, is it a disease? Disability is not a disease. It's human difference, like you and me. We all look different, we all do different, all speak different, and also, talking about speaking, one of our speakers said, people who can't speak, people with disabilities can speak, including people who use sign language. Sign language is a powerful language. It's recognized by a non-verbal language, by even convention. And unfortunately, we don't talk about it much. And in here even, in this, like the highest climate space, there has barely been any use of sign language, even in like key conversations, use of subtitles, captioning, that would enable people, even like me, with very mild level of difficulties. Yeah, I can't see mostly if there's no subtitle. So that's the thing. Anyway, it's not about me. It's about a population category. And I said they comprise about 1 billion, more than 1 billion population. And they are often either forgotten or an aftermath of whatever we do in education or climate and so on. And when referring to climate, to be specific, that they're identified as disproportionately impacted by climate crisis. So climate crisis impact disabled people or people with disabilities more than other people. And they are not present in the mainstream climate conversation, in formulation of mainstream policies and standards and so on. We try to understand why is that, like what's happening really. So one of the references that I would not repeat, that Stefan has mentioned about, we are part of that with the University of McGill University and International Disability Alliance, CBM being part of that research. We have learned from that entire process. We tried to deep dive into 16 different countries where CBM in particular works, and we found almost the similar data. That and our question was really specific, that in regards to climate change, DRR and humanitarian, which like often are dealt in silos, we try to understand like how the policies look like, the policies formed under DRR, climate change, humanitarian, do they really talk to each other? They barely do. So we talk a lot about silos and so on, but you could really see that, there has like barely been any conversation between the ministries, departments, and so on. And why is it kind of global phenomenon? It's just probably because we take disability as a special thing, as a vulnerable thing. So we refer them to some sort of medical kind of domain. And we probably conclude, probably it's not written anywhere, but this is one of the kind of understanding that we try to get from those conclusions, that why only like out of 30 countries recently 16 countries, only 20 to 30% of the entire literature that we recently tried to search, and we found that only 20 to 30% have somewhat mentioned people with disabilities, although under the broad category called vulnerable population, and you're not sure if people with disabilities are there even. We call it some sort of ableism, probably. Some sort of not liking people with disabilities a lot. Yeah, so we won't get to that conversation. But bringing back to education, which is one of the key areas of this conversation, we'd like to highlight that, education has been proposed under UNPRPD, which is the Human Rights Treaty, specialized treaty that UN had to come up to for people with disabilities, to reiterate the fact that, global population should reiterate their commitment for these people who are missing. That, they have rights, and for their education. Is it my time?
Yeah, I'm sorry to...
Okay, so just 30 seconds maybe. Okay, we promote partnership with people with disabilities and with OPDs. That's something we started with. And we promote meaningful participation like of people with disabilities. And there are frameworks such as interagency standing committee guideline. There you would find certain must-dos when we actually work on disability or try to promote participation of people with disabilities. That will empowerment, meaningful participation of people with disabilities, engage people with disabilities and their organizations in getting data, because data is a huge issue, because if you don't know if they really exist, you won't be able to address their issues. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad you were able to make it, because definitely these conversations cannot happen without civil society and organization of persons with disabilities. We at the fund, I think we're the only UN pool funding mechanism that has two civil society organizations. One is the International Disability Alliance as member of our boards, and they take decisions equally with the donors and the UN agencies on programming, strategic orientation of the fund. So we really believe in this, and very pleased that you were able to make it. So I'll leave now the floor to Kati Antalainen, senior specialist from the Ministry of Education and Culture, Finland. Just please, Katie, my appreciation for Finland as one of the biggest donors of the UNPRPD fund, and we want to hear from you. If you could just provide some closing remarks, but specifically in relation and your reflection as a country that has opened the way on climate action, on disability, on education. So we really look forward to your reflections. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to be here. I'm substituting the ambassador for climate, coming from the MFA, so Ministry for Foreign Affairs side, Kerstin Stendahl. So I'm representing the education sector, and utmost privileged to be here. I try to be very brief. A lot has been said. The climate crisis is real, and the most vulnerable. I do understand the vocabulary, and that is actually one of my takeaways. Even we all have to constantly challenge ourselves in our communities and in our everyday life, because wording, they do mean something, and wordings do become action, and they do shape our ways of thinking. But vulnerable groups that have maybe challenges more than some other, then they do tend to get even worse in the times of crisis. And the sheer number I won't repeat, but 16% is a huge number. And but we're very happy, Finland is very happy that the UN is also taking increasingly a UN-wide approach, so that there is a UN wide strategy in place on disability inclusion. Well, for Finland, in 22, in the Global Disability Summit, we made 5 commitments to advance the rights of persons with disabilities. I only mentioned 2 of those, including advocating the rights in international partnerships. So we want to speak on behalf of this issue. And we also made a commitment to support for disability inclusive disaster risk reduction. And this is also taken into account, for example, in our education sector funding. For example, this year Finland contributed another 8 million euro to the ECW, namely the Education Cannot Wait. But coming from the education side, so just a few words from Finland, because we quite strongly feel that inclusion is in the DNA of education sector in Finland. We have our challenges. There is no perfect system. We have the recent PISA results, and we are having signs that there really is no perfect system. But still, I think overall, what is in our system, what has worked, although we are seeking measures to improve it, is first of all the idea of individual support, that teachers take every learner as an individual, and support measures are tailored to the extent possible. So precisely as you mentioned in your intervention, there are all kinds of needs. Maybe not everything is special need, but all kinds of needs. So the flexibility, the adaptability, the agility of the system needs to be there. And there needs to be multi-professional collaboration within schools and also beyond schools. So the education sector, the health sector, and the social sector, they need to be intertwined and be in permanent dialogue. Special needs, again the word special needs, so sorry for that, but teachers in special needs, we need to look into that. Are they sufficiently, for example, what is the quality of their education? But we also need, and that is maybe even more important, we need to look at inclusive pedagogies and practices in the sort of mainstream teacher education. It is very, very much the key. So in all teachers' education. Then, and my final, I know that my time is over. Children, actually, they take their peers in the classroom and in their environment. They have no problem of stigmatization. Quite often it's like that. But the overall public maybe has more, let's say, issues. So I think we do need the awareness raising. And again, coming back to your very strong intervention. And then we maybe speak of human rights education. We need education for human rights, we need education on human rights, and we need education about human rights. These are the wordings of the UN declaration. So we need to focus on the broader public, and we need to always have our international commitments on the table, regardless if it's the UN declaration, regardless if it's the UNESCO freshly adopted recommendation on peace, human rights, and sustainable development, regardless if it's the UN Convention, regardless if it's the UNESCO Convention 1960 against preventing discrimination in education. But all these are international commitments, and governments need to adhere to it. So I wish to conclude by saying that why we need to have inclusive approach. Well, it's quite simple actually. When we have that approach, when we have that in our everyday work, then at the end of the day we are working towards inclusiveness of all. So all really means all. So I wish to conclude to that and say that this way to work needs to cover from policy to practice. So I wish to conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we really don't have any more time, so I would close this session here. Thank you so much for our guests. Get a special bonus for staying until the end. Thank you very much.